Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Xsolla sessions. We're thrilled to have you in the room with us today. We've got our brilliant state of play, the gaming industry at an inflection point, hosted by the wonderful Chris Hewish.
Hi. Thank you. All right, welcome everybody, and thank you for coming today to join us as we talk about this industry that we all love, the video game industry. Today I want to go through a few things with you as we talk about what's going on in the industry, talking about kind of the reset that's going on, some of the challenges that are facing the industry, and some of the great opportunities that lie ahead. So without further ado, I will hop right into the slides here. So we'll kick things off and we'll talk a little bit about what is going on in the industry. And there really is a reset that's occurring. There is great economic compression that's happening and structural consolidation that's going on. And what I mean by all of that is that the business of games is changing. And it's changing in an incredibly positive new way that is creating amazing opportunities for companies all over the world. So while there are challenges and there are all kinds of new things to learn, it also is creating a great era of opportunity. And it's not a cyclical downturn that we're in, it is really a structural reset. So while costs are rising, margins are compressing, and power is redistributing, this is all the ingredients that are creating an opportunity to build exciting new businesses around games. And we'll cover a bunch of that as we go through here. So first of all, the hard reality. Over the past 24 months, 28% of game developers have experienced a layoff. 48% of those remain unemployed. That is just sad and horrible for the industry. So it's good to acknowledge this up front, that we have gone through an incredibly difficult period of time, but that time does not reflect, as I mentioned, a downturn in the industry. It really is representing a sort of a reset and a redistribution of where the opportunities lie. During this period, we are seeing that AAA games are not stabilizing, and that scale alone is no longer really an insulation from, to protect you for success or from downturn. We see that 66% of AAA workers have reported layoffs or have seen those happening within their companies, and 19% of them have actually been laid off in the past 12 months. So I share this just to give a bit more of a picture of what's going on, that the downturn that people are experiencing is not just part of one section of the industry. Even the biggest companies are experiencing this. And we are also seeing that the talent pipeline is fracturing. And what does that mean? It means that new talent preparing to come into the industry is worried. 74% of students are worried, and even more, the educators, the people training the next generation of game developers, are overwhelmingly worried about what the market conditions will be like for their students as they come in. What does this mean for the next generation? And while you'll see as we go through the presentation here, there are great opportunities for the next generation. There is the worry, but the reality is that there are great opportunities ahead. But the impact of that worry now means what's happening to that talent. Are we going to be losing skilled people to other industries, going to AI, going to other markets? So what does that really mean? And I share this stuff because this is all meant to be material that as you're running a game business, you think about these things and keep them in mind. So if you're building a modern game business, it's good to know what are the concerns about the people that are working in the industry and coming into the industry so that you can respond accordingly. And responding accordingly means that you take advantage of what's happening in the shift of power. And there is a big shift in power that's occurring. And what I mean by that is, traditionally, historically, games have really been dependent upon third parties for getting their games to market, for distribution, for accessing player bases. That is changing. And that power is now coming into the hands of developers with the ability to go direct to consumer, to connect with their players, in addition to building businesses on platforms. And this is where some of this gets pretty exciting. We see that, we know that attention is finite, and we know that wallet share is compressing. You can see that fewer people are buying console games, only 50% tie ratio, which is down from what it used to be. Gen Z players are reducing their play to purchase intent by 41%. So there is some economic pressure that's happening. And at the same time, there's been a shift back to premium content as a focus. So we know that 74% of developers are now working on premium titles, and 26% are working on free-to-play. What does that mean? Why am I sharing this information? For years, we've heard the story of how it's all about free-to-play. That's where all the big growth is. That's where everything is happening. And while that is true, it's a very, very great business, there has been a shift back to gamers and developers looking for premium content, right? Things that they know they can buy, get a high quality experience from at a set price, or maybe there's some additional hybrid models that go into play there. So again, this is something to think about when we're operating or building a business in games, is that you don't have to fall into just the free-to-play trap, right? That there is an opportunity here in the premium space. Also, we're seeing that monetization trends are stabilizing. So 68% of games are using paid currency, 46% are using battle passes. This is really showing some innovation in monetization, that while these individual forms of monetization have kind of plateaued, we're seeing more and more developers doing a mixed blend. And what is really setting the successful developers apart from the ones that aren't succeeding is the ability to deliver good quality content within any of these models. And at the same time, we're seeing a real reallocation, and this is kind of part of the big story here. We're seeing a reallocation of revenue due to some of these margin shifts that are happening with companies starting to build direct-to-consumer as a key part of their business. You have companies like Playtika, Q4 of 2025, their Q4 report that just came out, they announced that 36.8% of their revenue came from direct-to-consumer channels. Huge Games, 45%. We see partners that are doing even more of that. 60, 70% of their revenue is being generated off platform. So again, why do I share these kinds of things? It's because direct-to-consumer and being able to get a much higher margin off of the revenue that your players are spending is a reality. And many companies are taking advantage of it now. It's not just a trend. And as you'll see as we go through this, the players are responding to this. In fact, one of the great things here, the slide is a little misleading. I say the margin reallocation, but it's actually about the value proposition. When you're going direct and you're going on a platform, but also through your own web shop or your own PC storefront or whatever it may be, you actually can build a much deeper relationship with your players and provide better value to them that in return encourages them to actually spend more, engage more frequently. So that becomes an uplift to your business as well. Of course, platforms are still central to any part of the business. We never advocate abandoning a platform altogether. The value proposition on platforms has changed over the years, but they still have massive audience reach, right? 78% of the audiences are reached through third-party platforms, and discoverability still happens on those platforms to a great degree, 43%. Although that number is down quite a bit, and that is, when I talk about the value proposition changing on platforms, one of the key things I mean there is that when you used to launch on the App Store or Steam or any other digital storefront, you could be pretty sure that if you got featured or you got some sort of store support, you were going to get discovered and your game was going to get a lot of attention. That is not so much the case anymore. And you can see that in the fact that that discoverability number is down from where it used to be. The good news is when you're then offsetting that by going direct yourselves, you have a whole new channel to be able to acquire users, message them, get your game discovered through whether it's traditional online ads, through email lists, direct marketing, social, whatever. There's so many opportunities there. So at the same time, what we're still seeing is a lot of companies are still optimizing, as it says here, for reach, right? Over control. And that means that they're still relying too heavily on the platforms, which is the reach, right? Versus what really we're seeing and what the trend going forward that is gaining momentum and we're seeing successful companies embrace is really embracing the idea that they have control over their audience and the discoverability in their business, and then that leads to increased reach and discoverability. We are seeing also, I mentioned this earlier on when talking about some of the different business models, monetization models, that hybrid is really emerging as a very legitimate model that not only is something that you can do relatively easily, but that your players are embracing. And what does that mean? this is about where you're delivering your content. I got a little mixed up. There's another discussion about hybrid monetization models. But this hybrid model is about the blend of how you deliver your content. In the US, 43% are still sort of, 43% of US game companies have embraced a hybrid model where they go through existing digital storefronts, but they also go direct themselves. And what's interesting is the players are meeting them there, especially younger players. Gen Z is very comfortable finding content outside of the app stores, outside of the PC storefronts. So it's a real strong opportunity that continues to gain momentum. Also, we're seeing a shift. There's a lot of change, right? Reset. We're seeing a shift, interestingly, in the game engines and who's building with what. As you can see here now, Unreal is the predominant engine. It has the largest market share amongst developers. 42% are developing with Unreal versus 30% share with Unity, which is quite a change to what we had just a few years ago. And part of that is just because of the predictability and what's going on with the engines and all of that. Interestingly, Steam Deck has, and I had my reservations, but this is a really strong signal out there that PC portability without traditional platform controls, without gatekeeping, is actually something that players really respond well to and can be successful. It's another way to be able to grow your business. You have 28% of developers making games for the Steam Deck, another 40% that are interested in doing it. So Steam Deck, not the trend that, sort of the quick trend that a lot of people thought that it might be. I think it's a real platform that's here to stay, and it's great for PC portability, getting games off the desktop and into players' hands wherever they may be. So making all of this happen is a lot of technology, right? And with great technology comes great tension. So what does that mean? It means there's amazing tools out there for players or developers to use, but those tools, such as AI, are meeting some resistance and some tension as people figure out what is the best way to utilize them, what's the right way to use them. So we'll cover a little bit of that now. Let's start with AI. So AI is a hot topic. Obviously, that's what everyone keeps talking about. What is the impact of AI? How are people using it? We're now getting some good data coming out, some research studies that are showing how AI is actually being used in the workforce. In the games industry, 36% of developers report using generative AI in their daily workflows. And interestingly, just over half of them have a negative perception of that, even though they're kind of being forced to use it. And what we're seeing is a real tension that has arisen between the operational parts of game companies that are fully embracing AI, asking teams to use AI, and the resistance that's coming from the teams themselves, especially from the creative and engineering sides of the development teams who are feeling threatened by it and are kind of reluctantly using it. So, the shakeout is that while everyone thought AI might take over game development and we're going to have AI-made games, and certainly there are people working on that, AI predominantly is just like it is in all industries, finding an initial foothold on the operational side, making productivity and business workflows a little bit easier versus replacing the creative side of things. And where it is actually delivering and where it's getting consistent sort of praise and feedback is reducing timeline allocation, reducing timelines, allowing developers to build quicker, reducing support cost that goes on around it a lot of times in sort of managing those workflows. So there is efficiency that's happening here, and it's more than a gimmick, but it is still more of a productivity enhancer than a creativity replacement. We are also seeing, as all of this reset is happening and as companies are maturing and doing different things, that the live service model is really evolving and maturing quite a bit, especially as companies fully embrace owning that relationship. It's not dead. There have been certainly some high-profile failures over the past year of live service games that have come out and not taken off, but we are seeing that it is still a sustainable model. On the one hand, you have Apex Legends, my favorite game. I play it all the time, every day. It has seen a decline, although with their Gundam update coming out, I think today or yesterday, that decline should reverse. But Roblox, interestingly, is where we've seen a lot of the growth happening. Both of these are live service type games, so they're maturing, audiences are moving around a little bit. So it's kind of interesting you can pull your own lessons here. I think with something like Roblox, it's much more social and engaging, and that's bringing a lot of people in, whereas traditional live service games that are just pushing new skins or new maps as updates may be struggling a little bit. So, it's a model that is still very successful, but has to mature. So beyond that, we have a whole new operating environment, and that means that it is really an interesting time, not just an interesting time, the place that you can operate a games business has really evolved and changed over the years. And it's very, very important, and you hear us talk about this often, but it's very important to really look at where you're running your games business, how you're growing it, and the opportunities are just fantastic. Growth is truly global. We're seeing that double-digit growth is still occurring in emerging markets. And I don't even necessarily like the phrase emerging markets because I think that downplays the reality. But you have the Middle East, Southeast Asia. These are places that are seeing rapid growth, very young populations, tech-savvy, gamer-friendly, willing to spend, and we're seeing strong growth happening in those regions. And in the mature markets, like in the US, Western Europe, there's still growth. It's just down to the single-digit growth, which is still fantastic. It's at 5 to 8% range. And what this all means and the opportunity for people is, games are still a growth business, but where that growth is happening is something that you have to operationally plan for and take advantage of. So you can't just relying on launching a game, assuming that it's going to have success in these sort of mature markets where historically games have had big growth. The real opportunity is to launch your game and figure out how am I going to tap into these additional markets where all the rapid growth is happening, because that's where all the next 100 million plus players are going to come from. And even though right now these emerging markets may not monetize at the same rate that the more mature markets do, they will eventually. So making sure that you understand those markets, work with the correct payment providers, understand regional content, even companies putting development into these markets, to help augment what they're doing, are all things to think about and could provide great opportunity. So within all of this, and especially as you go more and more global and go into all of these emerging markets, regulations become a real thing and can be a hindrance, or they could be a real competitive advantage. So what we're seeing is companies that embrace regulations, and what I mean by that is they understand regulations, they understand the nuances of what's happening, they stay informed of what's happening with game businesses around the world and digital businesses around the world, are able to turn that into an advantage because they can plan for it, they can be ahead of the curve. We see that 72% of regulations out there affect in-app platform marketplaces. 37% are offering purchases off-platform sites. And these are so this is the ability that regulations unlocks, is the ability to diversify. We've seen that with the Digital Markets Act in Europe, some of the regulations in the States, other places in the world. So it's not a back office thing. It really determines who is going to be successful and how people operate. So being able to be aware of these regulations, plan for them. So what does all of that mean? So a great example was with web shops, right? And in fact, we have a new example now with what happened with Google and Epic, where Google has announced that they are going to open up their Google Play Store to alternative billing, where games can actually put in different payment providers other than Google, the Google billing system. So companies that are aware of that and are moving quickly are able to slot in different payment providers, extend their global reach, and take advantage of that opportunity faster than competitors, which has a meaningful impact on the business. And to finally tug on the end of that thread, when I talk about someone getting in early, putting more alternative payments into their Google game, right, their Android game, that's important because in a lot of these emerging markets where the rapid growth is happening, you have players that 40, 50, in some cases 60% of the players are not using traditional payment methods like the big three credit cards or PayPal. They're using local payment methods, alternative payment methods that maybe were not integrated into the Google Play or Google billing system. But if a developer is able to then put their own billing system in, work with a company that aggregates a lot of different payments like we do, they can now extend their reach within a market and access more players. That's what I mean by regulations can become a competitive advantage, because a lot of companies don't think that through, and then they just wonder, why is my business not growing in this fast growing market? Well, it's because you're not really taking advantage of what the regulations allow you to do. So, kind of to bring this all together, we touched on a few things that leaders could do, but really the theme here is this whole reset. There's some tension around the technologies that are available. There's opportunities with regulations and taking control of your business and going direct to your players. But what does that all mean? What can leaders do other than some of the things that we touched upon here? So first and foremost, broad strokes, just architect, as it says here, for modularity and for speed. So really build systems that can scale, can do different things, and that can move quickly. Focus on shorter cycles, not just on, we hear a lot about talking about shorter cycles on game development, right? Being able to get content to market quicker, get games to market quicker. It also applies to how you're building relationships with your players, how you're engaging with them. Be consistent, don't just look at one beat at launch, like build a relationship, get information out there consistently, maybe a little bit quicker than you have in the past. Integrate all of these opportunities on shorter cycles. Don't wait a long time to bring in a response to a regulatory change that could benefit you. Get out there quicker. And you're able to do all of that when you are going direct, because you're not gate-kept, right? Your updates go in real time as soon as you push them. They don't have to go through approval processes. So shorter cycles across the whole, not just in developing the gameplay or game updates, but across the entire business is really what, is something leaders should really think about. Platform agnostic systems. So this is really important. We have more and more platforms evolving all of the time. And at the same time, players are increasingly expecting to be able to engage with their games across any platform. And now you've heard a lot of talk over the past few years about games being platform agnostic, where you can play your game anywhere, whether it's on iOS or Android or on PC or console. What I mean here, though, is platform agnostic systems beyond just the game itself, right? Your payment systems, your player identity systems, your social systems, right? Inventory, all of these things that a player touches, everything that touches a player, not just the game itself, but everything that a player engages with, really should be platform agnostic, because that's what players expect, and it reduces friction if they don't have to. We've all encountered different times where we have to use a different login on a different platform, and we don't have progression stored, we don't have our purchases stored, right? All of those types of things. That all, the opportunity is there now, and the technology is there to remove that and make everything homogeneous and agnostic across all platforms. And we're also supporting that with our recent updates to our SDKs, where we now have just one SDK for Unreal, one for Unity, one for Cocos, that has everything that we do in one SDK that can be integrated, and it brings everything cross-platform and is agnostic. So it's important because it is reducing any potential friction for your players, which is the name of the game, right? If you're going to be building a direct relationship with your players, reduce friction, make it as seamless for them as possible, meet their expectations, and then in return, they feel it's a better value for them. They have more trust and more engagement in the long term. And then the final thing to really think about here is focusing forever with games. It's like focus on performance, right? Make the game faster, all of that, make the graphics better, the fidelity better, whatever it may be. That's all important, but that's no longer really a key differentiator. Everybody can achieve this relatively easily. Optionality is really the important trend when it comes to thinking about building out and succeeding with a game business. And what does that mean? It means that you're giving your players all the options that they would need, right, to engage with your game. Any way that your player is spending on things in the rest of their life, they should be able to use that payment method in the game, right? It shouldn't be something that is a blocker. It should be an option for them. Anywhere they want to play the game should be an option. Anywhere they want to reach you as a developer should be an option. So thinking about optionality and what it means for your business is really key. And for too long, we've seen that a lot of developers and companies just focus on one thing. Like, I'm just going to launch on a store and that's it, right? And they don't think about the end user, right? They're thinking about the performance, the discoverability. They're not thinking about the end user and what is it that the end user expects when it comes to engaging with your game business and providing all of those different options for them. So that's really, really, really critical. Owning the relationship and revenue layer is super important, and it is something that is increasingly a realistic option. As I mentioned with Google, now you can put in your own billing system into Google Play. With web shops, you get to do that yourself. So what does this all mean? What does it mean when you own, like, okay, we get you, Chris, we understand you can do this, alternative payments, whatever, et cetera, but what does it really mean, okay? What it really, really means when you own that relationship and the revenue layer, the commerce component, you get all of the first-party data that you are not getting currently going through a third-party platform. Of course, you always get your data about the gameplay, and we know all about gameplay data. But when it comes to revenue data, commerce data, there is so much information there that can help you build more value for your players if you have that. It can also help you build more relationships to promote your game, create rewards, do all kinds of things. So what I mean by that is, with this first-party data, you get to see what payment methods your players are using in what region and what's performing better versus other different options. And then that creates an opportunity if you see that there's this local or regional bank, for instance, that's performing really well in your game in a particular country. Well, now you can create offers for your players that are centered around that. Maybe you can even go to that bank and create a cross-promotional opportunity or some sort of retention or reward opportunity. It's limitless what you can do. That's just one very, very narrow example of something that you can do when you own that revenue layer that you can't currently do when you're only going through a platform. And again, I'm not bashing on platforms like you need to get off of them. They're amazing. They have huge audiences. But there is now also this opportunity to really go direct and take control of that yourself and get information that helps you understand your most engaged players even better and provide more for them. Do direct commerce, right, with your players. Actually email customized offers to players based upon this additional information that you have. Give them direct opportunities to engage with your game, even outside of the game itself. And then finally, this is what I was meant to touch on earlier when I was talking about hybrid monetization, the ability to also start to layer together different monetization models, right? Both in the game and outside of the game. So it's not just making a player buy something at one point in your game, but now you can really layer together battle passes, in-app purchases and currency, loyalty programs, all these things, and you can put it across different touch points in your ecosystem and really create a hybrid monetization layer that speaks to all your different player types, right? And then increases, again, you'll hear me talk about this often, increasing the value proposition for players. What's a value proposition to a player who buys a battle pass? Maybe different, there may be a different type of value proposition to a player that gets an offer delivered to them in their inbox, right? And those could be two very different player types. And if you're only focused on one, you're missing out on the other. But of course, to know what those different player types are and what they're responding to, you need all of that first-party data. So there's a huge amount of opportunity here in owning that relationship and revenue layer. And then designing for global execution. So we are a global industry, which is a fantastic part of this industry, right? I love it. I love the fact that gamers are all over the world. Like music, it's a universal. People love to play games. But so many game companies still focus just on their own territory, on where they are actually based or where they're from. But the fact of the matter is, players spend all over the world. So being aware of the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, in many places, over half of your gamers are not using the same payment methods that you're using every day, right? And if you're not aware of that and building for it, you're losing out. It's as simple as that. People wonder why, well, these emerging markets don't monetize as much as, like the US and Europe. There's multiple reasons for that, but a big part of it is, yeah, you're not giving people a chance to monetize, right? They can't actually spend on your games. Localized compliance is increasingly important as the world as more and more regulations come on, right, and more regions and countries, municipalities and cities start to enact their own digital rules and laws and regulations, compliance goes from being something that used to be handled by the platforms and very kind of macro to very, very local. And it's something you do need to be aware of, especially when it comes to owning that direct relationship. There are many more things that you have to be aware of, from privacy concerns, digital rights rules, all of that. But fortunately, there are companies like ours that take care of all of that for you. And then finally, cross-market readiness. Really being ready to take advantage of different markets in different ways. Not just from the content of the game. Again, many of these concepts we've had for a while on the gameplay side, because that's what developers and publishers controlled. Well, now that you can have control of the business itself, these same ideas are flowing through. So, how do you create your business so that it actually can succeed in different markets? Taking the time to understand it could be any number of things. In some markets, the way that you even present a sale, right, to the user could be framed differently. And if you're just pushing a campaign that's created in North America to around the world, you might be using the wrong language, right? It may not, I don't mean language as in the translation, the words themselves, right, may carry different meanings, or maybe it's a little too crass to speak about a sale as, upfront as you would in here, as you might in another market. Being able to create offers that speak locally across markets. These are all things to be thinking about when owning that relationship and going direct. And then, finally, optimizing for lifetime value, right? This is really important. Frictionless onboarding, payment flexibility, sustainable monetization. So many games are focused on optimizing for launch and like a short period thereafter. And lifetime value is something that's, of course we measure it, but it's still kind of abstract. It's more of what comes from your most engaged players, because they'll stick around and they'll spend for a long time. Well, now that games, especially as you're able to start to take control of the relationship with your players, right, and you actually can understand them and get data on them, there's much more opportunity to really optimize that lifetime experience that the player's having with your game. You can focus a lot more on frictionless onboarding to a player, because if you're going to own the relationship, you can keep that player for much longer, right? So it becomes very important to onboard more players into your system. So try to remove as many barriers as you can there. Offer all these payment flexibilities that we've talked about, and think about sustainable monetization. Again, not old concepts, but much more important now than they have been in the past. Sustainable monetization is talking about not burning out your players up front to try to get a revenue spike, but really thinking like, okay, now that I know who they are, I get all this data on them, I can take a little bit longer of a view, because I can increase my lifetime value and I can sustain that player. I don't have to worry about them churning out as quickly. I can retain them more efficiently because I know who they are, and that all feeds back to creating more value over the long term. So, in closing here, I started off kind of, I think, a little doom and gloom, about some of the problems the industry has faced over the past few years, but the reality is this is just a change. The industry is rebalancing. It's not shrinking. There have been some tough times, especially with the layoffs that have occurred, but that was not indicative of an industry that is shrinking. A lot of it is indicative of an industry that is rebalancing. Power is shifting. There's been a lot of consolidation, but that also creates a lot of opportunity. And I think the question now really isn't whether the industry is changing or not. It's really who is designing for that change. And the people that design for that change, that recognize, hey, this is not the end times, right? This is not bad. This is not an industry I need to leave. It's just that the industry itself is shifting and changing, and that creates a real opportunity to approach it in a new way and find to success. So really designing for this next era in gaming, which is much more about owning the relationship, having more control over your business, having more optionality over how you get your game to market, how you keep it in market. Those are all things like, it's not comfortable for a lot of companies of like, oh, we're just making games. We don't want to think about all this business stuff. But that is really where the success in this new era lies. And it's the real differentiator that we're seeing with the companies that are succeeding and embracing this versus the ones that are keeping their heads down. And fortunately, there are many companies like ours, Xsolla, that can help with all of these things. We do all the things you need to actually engage and succeed in the ways that we've talked about here today. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. It's an exciting time in the industry. I think we're going to see great growth coming over the next 5 years or so, a lot of new exciting changes, and I hope that you're all part of that. So thank you. Okay.
Xsolla.